Hi,
Hello.
Mary Beth.
Very
Hi.
good.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You wrote the review for us for Dread Central back in during South by Southwest, right? You gave us a very nice review. Thank you so much.
I really like the movie, obviously.
Yeah,
So I'm super stoked to be talking with the both of you today about it. And congratulations
Awesome.
that it's coming out into the world finally.
yeah. We released in Australia and New Zealand last year, but yeah, this would be the obviously the US is such a big market that it's like very exciting to be coming out in the US. We're talking to way more people than we talk to in Australia, and yeah, it's cool.
Woo. Well, okay. Starting off, Matt, I would love to hear about how you came up with the idea for Monolith.
Yeah, so it was part of a lab here in South Australia, which is like our state funding body, the South Australian Film Corporation. So in Australia, there's a lot of government finance in the arts, and the SAFC had a lab initiative where basically you applied as a team. So Bettina, the producer, Lucy, the writer, and myself applied for this lab. You'd go through a year of developing a film, but you knew at the end of it, if you were successful through that year, you would get like a fixed budget, and it was like a micro budget to produce the film. And so we went into that lab with a bunch of very small half-page ideas, one of which became Monolith. But they were all ideas that were sort of taking advantage of that small budget and like trying to be more interesting because of it, or not squeezing a film into a budget, but like built from the ground up to suit that kind of small micro production methodology. And so, yeah, one of our ideas was I pitched the guys an idea about a psychologist interviewing people after an alien abduction, and it would be a series of interviews. And it was Bettina, the producer, who was like, "What about a podcaster? I think that there's something interesting and zeitgeisty and current about that." And yeah, we kind of ran with it from there. And it was this challenge we set ourselves: could you do like a big X-Files episode, but with one actor in one location talking to people from around the globe? And so we sort of, the three of us, broke that story, and then Lucy went off and wrote a really amazing script, and here we are.
Hell yeah. Well, and so Lily, I actually saw this before I saw Evil Dead Rise. So I was like, oh, the girl from Monolith is in Evil Dead Rise, everybody. So like I was
Yeah.
I was telling people like I knew who she was before everyone else did. I was like this, I think it was the same festival. It premiered, did both the
Yeah.
films that must have been nuts for you as an actor, like two very different movies happening at one
Such
time.
different movies, but also just so amazing. It just shows you South by Southwest, which is just such a melting pot, and there's just room for all. And it's like, yeah, it was a total whirlwind, and both experiences so different to one another, yet weirdly similar in a sense of just like nervous system being totally corrupted and showing chronological order. That's pretty much it, actually. That's it.
Oh yeah. Well, I wanted to hear more from you what it was like to be one, the only person in this movie, and how you're like the reactions to the audio. And I'll ask follow up after that. But first, like, I know this is so different from Evil Dead Rise. So, what was this like for you as an actor to kind of be solo on camera almost the entire film by yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a once in a lifetime experience. I don't know if I would ever do it again. I think not knowing what it's like and then knowing what it's like, completely different. But as an experience, like prep wise, I felt like I had to learn the script like theater. And Lucy's
Oh
writing and
yeah.
dialogue is just so weirdly easy to learn. It's always like a sign when you're like, if you can memorize it quite quickly, there's just like a rhythm to it, or it just sits in your body easily. But yeah, so we had like the audio set up. So it was one actor, and Sia Nathan. And basically it was just all fed to me. So it just became, once you strip back, like another body to take in another actor, another set of eyes. Like it's a whole other language that kind of gets
Yeah.
dropped and lost. So it was like, it was quite a bizarre, meditative, kind of weirdly like alienating, like bizarre experience, really. I don't even know. It's like every day I'd show up and just kind of relinquish control. And I think as well, if you are going to be alone for that long, shoot it in 15 days. Shoot it in
Yeah.
15 days.
Get
There's
it
no
done.
time
Rip
to
the
think.
band-aid off.
Yeah, you just, because it really is like nothing else. Like it just made me realize how I love other actors to work with and to be able to like, and Matt was amazing support wise in that sense. But ultimately it was, yeah, it was quite a psychedelic experience where noise cancelling headphones, audio, like you're kind of like, yeah, and just
So were
kind of.
you, I was curious about the audio. So like, did you was the audio of the other actors recorded first, or was it someone reading to you? Like, how was that done to kind of have your reactions to the stories that were being told to you?
So it was all live. It was all fed through,
Okay,
yes, in the moment, which was amazing, to have
cool.
that, but one actor. And then
Yep.
the rest of the cast were put in later. So they had to act to what were you saying, Matt, where they had to act to whatever was locked off sometimes with the edit for me. So then the other
Yeah.
actors who jumped in were like playing jump rope with whatever I'd already put down to a degree.
Yeah,
Oh,
ideally you'd have like all the cast, but because again, this is because of this methodology, we don't have a lot of money. We're
yeah.
working, really kind of efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
The best option was and Suya, who is a friend of mine, who's a colleague of mine, and who plays Paula in the film. We just had her on set do everyone, and so like Lily's talking to an old German art dealer, but it says Suya again. And so that was just so we could have someone with us on set. It wasn't like a first AD reading the lines. It wasn't
Yeah.
a pre-record. My last short film was like about a robot, and that was all pre-recorded, and it just like stitched the actor up. Something. It was just so hard. So yeah, did all the voices in post, but they were live performances on set, so that Lil could have something to work with. And because we were replacing the audio, she could ask Ansuya to do kind of strange things too, like, oh, can you just yell at me on this line, or like make a really weird noise on this line, or whatever, just so that I've got something to kind of like kick me into a new gear. So that was really helpful, and it meant that I could just concentrate on Lily and just trust. And so is like a writer and a creator on her own right. So she understood the script, and I could just let her kind of go. She was in a like a walk-in wardrobe down the other end of the house, like with a microphone pumped into Lily's headphones. Yeah.
Oh, that's so
Yeah.
cool and weird. Like that is such a
Yeah.
strange experience as an actor, but cool in a way. Like you
Yeah,
said,
it was.
psychedelic.
Yeah, exactly. And also like again with the house and then that dance of creating suspense, which felt like, the house felt like another character, which we've been saying quite a lot. But like it was such a dance when you're like alone and there's one actor and you're in, one department in your one person in your department. It was just so fun, I think, between like Michael Tessari, who's the DOP, Matt, and I, to just kind of create this constant level of suspense and isolation of shooting and figuring out how to how to dance when there's only one person alone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
It's
and
really
that must
fun.
have like, Matt, I'm curious about the post-production process here because I feel like so much has come, I guess, with your sound designer and your sound mix, like because it's such an audio heavy movie, which is
Mm.
so interesting and has actually had been very inspiring for me as a creative of like how to use audio in a new way because I feel like podcast horror isn't really tapped into quite yet in terms of movies, and seeing how you use the audio is fascinating. So I was just curious about that post-production process and nailing that audio aspect and really making it such an immersive experience. Like I watched it on headphones and that was an incredible way to watch it, getting that kind of immersive Monolith experience in a way.
Yeah. Well, Lee Kenyon, the sound designer, and Ben Speed, the composer, I've worked with quite a lot before, so we've got like a good rhythm and simpatico with each other, which is helpful. But there was like a really clear choice that visually the film would have an almost observational quality. Like I was really inspired by this film called Hidden by Michael Haneke, Cache, which like, and Haneke always presents horror with like or terrible things in a very plain way. He just sort of like just sets the camera and lets it happen, and there's something really terrifying about that. So I was super interested in that, and then really contrasting that with what is a very subjective sound design. That the sound is really inside Lil's head. It's really like it morphs and changes over the film. You're very much inside her internal world with that, and the way that there's a wavel kind of sound that is like the character of the brick that is gradually growing through the film. You kind of catch a sense of it right at the start, but it builds and shifts and changes over the film. And so it was really important to me. I love being super detailed with sound, and that's in every film, not just a film that's about a podcast. Like I'm really interested in what sound can do. And the fact that Lee keeps working with me after how anal I get about sound is a miracle. Bless him. But yeah, it was just, we didn't have a lot of time, but it was just about being very specific and detailed about what we wanted to do, and like being like, okay, and really making clear choices about like, there's going to be a brick noise or the sound of the growing illness or whatever that is, and how are we going to play that through the film. And then Lee and Ben were having a lot of discussions, because Ben's music is pretty textured. It's not super melodic. So a lot of discussion about, okay, what's music and what's sound design. The editor was putting in, like, before we went to sound design, my editor, Tanya Nime, who's this incredibly experienced editor in Australia, she's really like a total god of the industry. And she was doing stuff like getting atmosphere of a forest with like nice bird sounds, but slowing it down to 5% and then just putting it underneath scenes and stuff like that, just to give us like something to kind of work with. And, you know, that's not in the film, but that was stuff that Lee and Ben would go away and be like, okay, how can we kind of replicate those sort of strange, you know, unnatural sounds? Like, how can we build something with that?
Well, and Lily, what was it like to like, you had this experience shooting and then seeing the actual sounds? Like, what was that like for you? That must have been such a weird kind of experience to be like, wait a second, that's so interesting what it sounds like now.
Yeah, and like obviously from when I read it from the beginning, and like obviously knowing the constraints that the film had to be made through, which was just like budget and time, and like everyone having to problem solve or to like just ways in this such a short condensed time to think outside of the box. So, which was obviously what drew me as well to the project, where I'm like, I'm terrified, but also everyone's in a position right now of having to kind of pull out what they've got and like work with what we've got. So it was just to watch it and to see what the result was. And just, I was totally outside of myself, because those are the elements. For me, when I watch a film that I'm in, I'm like, I watch other actors that are in the film, and then I can get how, or the sound design or the edit. And I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah, it's great. This feels good. This feels, you know, I feel like I'm like, I can judge this, but I won't really judge myself. But when you're the only person in the movie and the only one,
It's
talking so much. Those are the elements that blew me away, that I was like, from the sound design and the edit, and just being able to be like, oh, okay, I can relax. Like, this was a wild experience and always going to be really hard to watch, because you'd have to be a narcissist to enjoy that. But yeah, so it was so exciting. And then to be as well at South by Southwest, and for it to have an international life, you're just like, what? This felt like such a private experience and felt like such a exciting endeavor an experimental piece, you know. It was just like, it's so wonderful when other people get to see it. It's an international life.
So, did you both listen to a lot of podcasts to prepare?
We we interviewed this woman, Georgina Savage, who is an Australian investigative journalist who has done a number of, like, she's worked as a journo but has done a number of podcasts, and she did this podcast called The Invisible Hand, which is about rhino poaching in South Africa. And she was super interesting. So we just wanted to get a sense of like what it's like for her to be inside the story. And you know, we spent like Lucy and I spent like an hour or so with just talking to her, and that was just kind of enough to give us this insight into like what the process looks like. And also, like, interestingly, Georgina had like her podcast has, and we'd already written the script at this point, but there's this weird thing of like her podcast, and without spoiling it, is also about her confronting her family's legacy in a really interesting way. And like, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, there is something about long form podcast storytelling that becomes quite personal, right? Because it is like just one person speaking directly to you, and they'll often their story becomes wrapped up in whatever they're investigating as well, because their perspective is so closely linked to the story. So that was really, really interesting.
Yeah, and then the idea of interviewing people and recording yourself and then putting that on the podcast as well. It's like, it's so funny as you're like, you know, episode by episode, it's such an interesting thing. Again, you're talking to people, or then now you're summing up whatever the interview just was. And it's such an intimate experience that you're telling people what you've found, as opposed to like a condensed article as a journalist, and you've figured it out and you've broken it down and you know, you're safe and you're like a bit removed. But there's something really exposing about journalism in a podcast form, and like, and episode by episode, you know, it's just such a bizarre medium in a way.
It is a bizarre, as someone who does podcasting but not like that, it is a bizarre medium to hear yourself talk. What a weird experience. very strange to edit your own voice constantly.
Yeah, and in
Well,
people's ears, the desire is just be sitting right there, just in a little AirPod, just in a little headset.
I don't like to think about people perceiving me. You know what I mean? I'm like, no, there's no one listening to this. There is no one who's ever listened to this
Totally.
before.
But it's like a parasocial thing, right? Because it feels like they're talking to
Yeah.
you as well. And so that's like kind of what we're playing with in the film, is that like
Mhm.
I think podcasts have you sort of trust them implicitly because there is this feeling of a relationship between you and the storyteller, and
Yeah.
that's it, the levels of that we're trying to play with in the film. Like, can we trust Lily? Can Lily trust who she's listening to? And indeed, can the audience trust the filmmakers? Like, we're playing tricks with you as well. So there's this kind of levels of of who is in control of the narrative that we were sort of messing with. Yeah.
Well, thank you to the both of you for chatting with me today about Monolith. I'm so excited for this to be out in the world, in the US, and more people will see it, because I think it's a pretty special piece of filmmaking for the horror genre.
Aw, thanks for watching.
I'm so
Appreciate
glad you
it.
liked it. Thanks for taking the
Absolutely.
time.